whatever language you're writing, adding unit tests is a great way to check that your code works as you expect. So let's figure out how to do that in Rust. I've created a simple function that we can write some tests for, called sliceSum. So the function takes an array, and it will take a slice out of that array, starting at start and selecting len elements. Then it will filter out the negative numbers, keeping only the positive elements in the array, and compute a sum of those elements. So we've got a stub implementation in here for now, so that we can write our tests first, and then we'll come back and update the implementation once we have some tests in place. The simplest way to add tests to this file would be to add a module called tests, and we'll mark that as test so the compiler knows what to do with it. Config test, and then we can start adding some test cases in here. We'll add a function called testworks to do a simple test that the function does what we expect, and we'll mark that as a test. You can see that the IDE knows that it can be run as a test immediately, and we'll assert equals sliceSum, and the first time we access sliceSum it will import it from the parent crate, the enclosing scope. So we'll try a vector of 1, 2, starting from index 0, selecting 2 elements, so that will select both the 1 and the 2, and the sum should be 3. Next test, let's check that it correctly ignores negative numbers. So let's add a negative number into our list, and the result should be the same. We'll select the first 3 elements this time, but it should ignore the -5 and sum the 1 and 2 to get a 3 result. Let's check a boundary condition next, so we'll check for handles an empty list. So we'll pass no elements in our vector, we'll select no elements from the list, and we should get a sum of 0. Then let's try a list with elements in, but we select no elements from it. So we'll take a list with 1, 2, 3, select from position 0, select 0 elements, and we should get a sum of 0. Then we can check for some error cases, so we'll start with an index out of range. So we'll take the same list of 1, 2, 3, we'll start at element 10, which is after the end of the list, and select 1 element. This shouldn't yield any results, so we'll just expect a sum of 0. And then we'll try the opposite, so we'll start with the end out of range, and same list, starting at position 1 and selecting 10 elements. And this doesn't really make sense. We can't decide the result of this, so it's best that the function just returns 0. Let's see how those tests do. We can run all the tests for the current project by using cargo test, and that's telling us we've forgotten to rename one of our copy-pasted functions, so let's go back and fix that. So that's this one here. Let's give it a different name, something like ignores negative numbers. Let's run our tests again, and this time the program builds, but we have 4 test failures, and that's just because we haven't finished writing our function yet. So let's think about which ones are broken, jump into the code, and try and make that function behave like we want it to. So let's start building up our function. The first thing we'd like to do is select only part of the array, so we can use a slice with a range to select from start to end, and we'll have to define end to be start plus length. So that gives us a little bit of progress. We should also worry about our boundary conditions. So if start is greater than or equal to array.length, or the start plus the length is greater than the array length, then we should just return 0. We won't try and compute a sum in that case. And let's see how that does. So we'll run the test again. And we fixed 3 tests, but the test for negative numbers is still failing. We haven't dealt with that yet, so let's make one more change to the function to see if we can get that test to pass. To get rid of negative numbers before we do the sum, we could add a filter step in here, and that will take a lambda expression where we can check that the number that we're receiving is greater than 0, and because this number is a double reference from I32, we need to dereference it to compare it with 0. Let's see if that fixes the problem. We'll give our test one last run, and we've got all of the tests passing. Excellent. Inspecting our tests, we can see that just test works and test handle start out of range is enough to cover both of the branches in our function. Yes, we'd miss one of the branches of logic in the first if statement, but if we were to look at this in a code coverage tool with just those two tests, that would be enough to get 100% coverage of this function, when in reality we wouldn't have checked that the filter works correctly, and we wouldn't have tested both branches of our logic, and we wouldn't know what happens if we have an empty array. So this is a useful way to think about how your function is going to behave before you write it, and test what it should do rather than what it does. Have a go at trying to write tests like this next time you're writing some Rust code.